My name is Jennifer Barrera. I'm the Executive Vice President of the California Chamber of Commerce, and I wanted to welcome everyone to this presentation we've put together on a very important topic on diversity and inclusion. First, I'm going to introduce our elected officials, Assemblymember Garcia and Assemblymember Lowe we have here today. Assemblymember Garcia, she is the Assembly member for the 58th District, which is down in Southern California. She was elected to the Assembly in 2012. And since she's been here, she's just been just an amazing, fierce advocate on behalf of women, women's issues, environmental justice issues, good government and ethics. Just a really strong leader in all of those areas, has introduced and passed legislation on a number of those items. And then I want to introduce Assemblymember Evan Lowe. Assemblymember Lowe was elected to the Assembly in 2014. He represents Assembly District 28, which is in the San Jose area. He is currently the chair of the Assembly Business and Professions Committee, which oversees the regulation, licensing, scope of practice of many professions here in California. He's currently the chair of the LGBTQ+ caucus, the vice chair of the Asian Pacific Islander caucus. And prior to coming to the Assembly, he served on the Campbell City Council, where he was the first Asian American to serve on the council. After that, he was the Campbell mayor, where he was the youngest open LGBTQ+ mayor in the country. And then on to our board members, CalChamber board members, which I'm so pleased to have join us as the panel as well. Diane Miller. Diane is the CEO of Wilcox, Miller and Nelson, which is a firm that helps with executive and board searches and governance consulting. She is considered an expert in these areas. She has, as I mentioned, a board member of California Chamber of Commerce. She served on our board for many years. For 10 years, she has served as a national faculty member for the Board Advisory Services at the National Association of Corporate Directors. So again, just an expert in the field of corporate governance and directors. We're so grateful to have Diane here with us today.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yes, and last but certainly not least, Mr. Kevin Mitchell, another board member of CalChamber. Kevin is the Sector Vice President of Global Supply Chain at Northrop Grumman. Northrop is in, as everybody knows, aerospace, military, autonomous systems, all cool stuff, just really interesting programs that they do at Northrop. He's been there since 2003. He has a Master's of Science from USC, a Bachelor's from the University of Phoenix, and again, attended executive programs at Harvard as well. He's involved in his community. He serves on the El Segundo Board of Education, University of San Diego Supply Chain Management Advisory Board, USC Supply Chain Management Board, a member of the Greater LA African American Chamber of Commerce, Antelope Chamber of Commerce, and as I mentioned, a proud member of the California Chamber of Commerce. So thank you, Kevin, for participating as well.
Thank you for having me here. Appreciate it.
Is diversity and inclusion the same thing? What do those two terms mean, and what did they reflect? Assemblymember Lowe, I'll hand that one off to you and see, have you comment.
So when we think about diversity and inclusion, that's where I think the role that government plays with you as well in the private sector to help say, where can we help focus on good actors and help support where we all want to go? Can we all acknowledge that it's good for the bottom line and good for business, for the company values, the culture of the employee resources group, that when they are empowered and that they are celebrating just beyond just Black History Month or Lunar New Year and let's celebrate the good food. It's more than just those celebrations, but also sharing each other's experiences so that we'll figure out, oh boy, we have much more in common than we have different. So on the diversity inclusion front, I think it is important to be intentional about the policies that are in place that will force us to have these conversations, because human nature is such that we won't necessarily talk to each other, we'll talk around each other, but these policies will force us to pause and have those conversations all the way at the top. And then, of course, from the government and legislative side, we're going to continue building off of the work of previous legislative bodies and heading in the direction. And hopefully we'll look at the statistics and the percentage around diversity and corporate boards all the way down, and then build off of that.
Inclusion to me is equal access and providing pathways for that. And so if I define it broadly, I would also add in professional background. So, and what may be diversity in one company may not be diversity in another company. So I think companies have to decide what that looks like for themselves. I don't even need big brain surgery out of it, and I've seen companies do that. But I think it's simply having a pragmatic effect in looking at what is it here, what could we do here. But that equal access to me is the important avenue to create this.
Thank you so much for that, Diane. Kevin, why do you think diversity and inclusion is so important for the private sector, and why I would say is it such a present issue now? What are your thoughts on that?
Great question. It's I like to correlate things with sports. Can you imagine all the people on a basketball team, all are 7 foot tall, thin, and they can go inside and slam dunk the ball, but none of them can shoot a free throw. None of them can shoot a 3-point shot. None of them can play defense. You want diversity. You want all the players to bring something else to the table, and that brings the most productivity to the team. So in corporate America, what we find, the more diversity you have, you increase an inclusive environment. If you use an inclusive environment with diversity, you drive your productivity up, which is your profit and your margins, and you create a great environment for all. And at the bottom line, that's what we're all in business for, is to drive the bottom line. So it really doesn't make sense to create an environment that does not create that opportunity for your own business. And I like to kind of share it with a thought. If you go to a Japanese restaurant, a Mexican restaurant, and you order a hamburger, you say, well, why did you go get diversity by going to a diversity place, but you're going to do the same thing because you want an American hamburger? So when you look at it, you want to go to those different places to get the benefit of what that diversity has to bring. And I think sometimes we cut ourselves short and don't understand that diversity has so much to not only bring to the table just to drive productivity, but it allows you to learn and create innovation. Because everyone brings something different to that table to allow you to understand this is a way a different demographic may look at it, a different gender may look at it, a person with disabilities may look at it. And when you put it together, you can come up with better solutions that can create a larger benefit for a larger audience. So I believe those are the reasons why I believe diversity and inclusion is very important to us all.
Thank you for that, Kevin. Assemblymember Garcia, do you have anything to add to that? And from the public sector, why it's so important for government and the public sector to have diversity and inclusion?
We legislate on experience. And so, when women are not at the table, 52% of the population isn't there, and our experience isn't, being advocated for. I think the same goes whether we're a person of color, we're someone disabled, our sexual orientation. And so we want to make sure that our policies are inclusive. Our body needs to look diverse as well out there. And so for me, it's just basic, on the experience out there. And I think the same thing, you talked about innovation, Kevin, and I wrote myself Mexican innovation, and I think it's true, right? It's like, I grew up in a household where failure was not an option. You just had to figure it out. And we were given permission that we might not figure it out in the most finesse way, but we'll fix that later. But I think that's what diversity also brings to the table, that it's like, we might identify a problem that maybe you didn't identify, or we might identify a blind spot in the market that we're not, that we're missing out on, and it could really increase our bottom line out there. And so, it's important out there, but in the legislature specifically, we legislate on experience, and if we're not there, we're not being advocated for.
Thank you so much for that perspective as well. Okay, so we all agree that diversity is good, inclusion is good. Where do we start, and what is our first start? How do we even get there? Diane, I'll lead it off to you for the private sector to give your thoughts on where do we start?
Well, I'm gonna, if I might take it from the avenue, Jennifer, of a smaller business, because I know Kevin's got the big business piece down cold. The smaller businesses, it can be initially a little intimidating, I think. They're just trying to make payroll that week. So the fact that they've got to add something more into an overburdened plate already is difficult. But I think to take a step back, you just need to do two things. And one is you need to define what is diversity in our organization. Again, going through all the things we talked about and defining as broadly as possible. And then secondly, once you decide what that looks like for you, then just have one metric that you're going to pursue, just one. So perhaps it's to increase ethnic diversity on our customer service team. And we're going to do that by 15% by 2025. The Silicon Valley Leadership Growth, they have that 25 by 25. So 25% of executives will be diverse candidate or will be in place as diverse executives by 2025. So just pick one metric and go through your normal workday with that in mind. And I think if you ask employees, they will help you with this. So having a diversity definition that the employees, that everyone's come up with and agrees to, and then with that one metric, how do we do that? And I think otherwise, I think people try to boil the ocean with this and they don't get any forward movement. And we just pick that one metric.
Kevin, from a larger company, where does a larger company start with regards to improving diversity and inclusion?
It's the same thing that Diane said. Diane said it was great, is that we all have the same principles, regardless large or small. And it really starts with a lot of different fundamental just strategies. You have to start with a strategy first. What is it you're trying to achieve? Why are you trying to achieve it? Not just for the sake of checking a box. And then how do you lead it? And one thing about employees, they really want you to lead them to the successes that you believe you have. You have a great vision, they want to follow a person with a great vision. So it really starts at the top. How do you set the tone for your employees? How do you communicate it? Not only in writing, but visually as well. So if it has to be a Zoom video, if it has to be on a recording, it's great, but they want to see it come out of your mouth. And then also having goals. What is the goal that you want to have and what you want to achieve? You don't try to fix all world hunger in one shot. You want to say that you're going to make some steady progress over a period of time. So I think having a goal, having a metric that everyone can see, and it needs to be a public view where people can actually view the metric to see how you're performing to it. And then also you have to have the ability to have people to give input and make course corrections and changes to that goal or those initiatives. And then you use and I think Mr. Lowe said, Assemblyman Lowe said, the ERGs. When you engage the people in the workplace to be part of that solution, that's where you get your greatest value. So we leverage all of our ERGs, give them input, allow them to come up with initiatives, and we take those initiatives forward and we highlight and celebrate those initiatives. So when you look at, it's really a strategy to put all those things together. And then one thing that we do, which I think is really important, we have financial goals that we give the Wall Street, that these are the things we're going to go do. And all those are financial, how much ROS, how much sales, revenue, all those things you're going to do. But on the other hand, we have non-financial goals. And diversity and inclusion is one of them. And also, we look at our demographics and we say, what goals did we choose to meet in diversity? We have all those goals, and our compensation is tied to all of those metrics, not just one side of the ledger, but both sides. So I think when you put your money where your mouth is, that's a true statement where we work. And I believe that adds a lot of value to that as well.
I'm turning over now to our assembly members. Assemblymember Lowe, can you highlight where even government, how you start to increase diversity in the government public sector and some of the things maybe that the caucuses that you're involved in are working on to achieve that?
Thanks, Jennifer. Specifically around that, I've also been monitoring some of the questions and answers to incorporate some of the answers into the comments. But we are a little bit different, which that of the electorate. The electorate chooses us as the legislative body. And when you look at, for example, the 120 legislators that exist, it still is not up to par. Given the demographics, as Assemblymember Cristina Garcia will tell you about that the disparities, we still do not have enough women. And yet when we talk about then how do we have representation, but there are a number of factors to which government, for the voter, to try to decide how do you define qualified, how do you define experience, and there are different metrics around that. So it's not apple. This is like apples and oranges, not a similar comparison, but it's the question is what are we doing to focus on diversity and inclusion of ourselves? It's one to recognize, number one, that this is a problem. So therefore, we should not just say, well, it's the circumstance of the electorate, given the political cycles, but it's incumbent upon us to do that much hard work. So, for example, our caucuses have talked about looking at districts and demographics to say, should this quote unquote, is this a majority Asian seat? Is this majority Black seat? And how do we have dialogue around that if it's not represented? And for example, if it's If it's an Asian American in a predominantly Black district, how do we ensure that that representative has an African American chief of staff, devotes resources to the community, can be just as good as an advocate? And even putting on my LGBTQ hat, sometimes I will suggest that we have straight allies who are better champions than that of our own community with respect to being so assertive and aggressive and just constantly pounding the drums and saying, what can we do? How do we do more? So I think it's, again, recognizing that we have work to do. And the conversation, again, is different in the legislature because it's about how we share power. It's not the same. You can't apply the same principles in the private sector in which we have a board of directors. It's very different in how we share power. Whereas in private sector, it is very hierarchical and in top down. Whereas us, we talk about a democracy. And in a democracy, we work intentionally with sharing power. But naturally, it comes with conflict. So I reference that because this might sound like kumbaya, but the reality exists that even after this call, we'll fight fiercely about legislation, about how we share power, and that's okay. That's our democracy. But at the end of the day, if we say that our intention and our goal is to exhaust the conversations to get us to a place of diversity and inclusion for all, then that's I think, an achievable goal.
We do have disagreement from time to time, but that always seems to get us in a better space. Assemblymember Garcia, do you have anything to add to that and want to share anything that the Women's Caucus and Latino Caucus perhaps are doing to work on diversity and inclusion?
You know, when I got to the legislature, people would come in the room and I got to meet with a lot of exciting people, but it was very male dominated. And so I took stock of the power that I had, and I recommend that that's the first step. Take inventory. Where am I at? What's my baseline? And what's the power that I have to start to change things? And so I took stock for a little while, and it was like very clear to me what was coming through my door. And then I decided that, I took stock of my power also. And so as folks came in, I would ask, you couldn't hire a women lobbyist too, or you don't have any women who work for you. And I would still take a meeting, and we would still discuss policy and come to a compromise on legislation. But the next meeting, they would find themselves at least one woman, right? And then I would ask the question, there's only one woman that works for you? I would take stock of you don't have any women of color. And so I took stock of my power, and I used that very intentionally on a regular basis. And I continue to do that out there. And I will say that it has hopefully had a positive effect on the lobbying core and the Capitol community. I did the same thing through the Women's Caucus. We took stock of what does our workforce look like for women? Where are we at? Are we in positions of power? Are we in all the entry positions? Are we underpaid? And after doing a survey, we presented that data to the leadership, and we said, we need to do something here. And so leadership did work with us to start to change the way we hire, the way we promote, and increase salaries for people out there. While it's a public sector, I think the private sector starts off by saying, where am I starting at? And set that one goal, right? But when we meet that goal, it's like, what's my next step? Let's not be complacent. And then let's also make sure that we are providing the support for individuals out there. So, it's not going to be enough that I say, where's the woman in here? When they come in, that's who I'm going to talk to. When I see them in a committee meeting, that's who I'm going to ask questions of, right? Or I'm going to give them a tip later to be like, hey, do this better. So, we could be nicer to you in committee on a regular basis. We have the most women ever in the legislature, and that's been intentional. And we want to celebrate that, but I'm still shy 22 of parity. And so it's the work that I have to do to make sure I get there. And I'm going to be shameless about that.
Thank you so much for those comments. I'm going through the questions. One of them is with regards to implementing a diversity and inclusion program into your workforce and kind of changing the culture. And how do you deal with resistance that you may have from employees and how do you get them to buy in? Any panelists want to speak to that question?
I'm happy to start it off. I have a pretty, strong feeling about what values a culture has. And one of the things where we see things tip over in organizations, and now I'm talking from the board perspective, is when those values aren't honored and implemented. And so, it would be the same as providing an opportunity for someone to get into the company and then not, as we were talking about, moving them forward based on that. So at some point, I think you have to be a little non-negotiable about that. you want to be really clear about the metrics that you want to see and the initiatives that you want to see, and you want to track it. But being able to start at the beginning with the board and the CEO and have a unanimity of thought around how we're going to pursue this and make it part of the business plan and business strategy is going to get us a lot farther than talking about it, but having no engine behind it.
It's a real hard one because, you're going to have no initiative you put out, you're going to get 100% of agreement on. But I do believe that it starts with first putting a metric out before you even talk about you doing something different. What's the metric? What you're trying to measure? You may know that there's a problem, but the visibility is not there and the transparency is not there. So once you create that metric, you float a metric through your organization and you allow people to see it and you track it over a period of time. Once you do that for a while, then people get to see that these numbers are not improving. And then I think engaging your workforce, have think tanks get together with people made from the ground up, top down, get together and say, how do we address this issue and why is it important to our company? And you have to come with the why. And once you start to get those individuals to start to recognize there's a problem and willing to put some effort in to go resolve those issues, now you put a goal out to what you're trying to achieve. And don't make it where it's going to turn your company upside down overnight. It needs to be a 5-year strategy, something to say we're going to make progress every year and we're going to renew our commitment to that strategy and embed it into your company values and put it on the performance review. These are the things we're going to track, and don't make it punitive. I don't think you should make it punitive when you're first starting off a new program. Identifying, we want people to come up with initiatives, to get engaged, and ensure they're always doing the right thing for our employees. So I think when you start with those types of activities and actions, you can really start getting more people to maybe not like it all the time, but at least can understand why we're doing it, and it'll kind of soften some of the resistance. And those who don't, you have to sometimes let people know this is where we're going.
Right.
And I don't want this to sound harsh, but this is where we're going, and our company is going this direction. And if this is not consistent with your values, you have a decision to make.
Right.
To our panelists, to our speakers, thank you so much for participating in this discussion today. I know I certainly learned a ton from hearing your comments today. I'm sure our attendees did as well. And we can't thank you enough for taking your Friday afternoon to join us today. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Appreciate it.
Bye,
Great.
everyone. Have a great day. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Enjoy the weekend.